In the entire history of modern India, there are very few criminal cases that have grabbed a hold of the public and just refused to let go, quite like the Noida twin murders. This is a story that started as this incredibly sad private family tragedy, but it just exploded. It spiraled into a national obsession. You had this relentless media frenzy and an investigation that honestly seemed to create more questions than answers. It got to the point where the whole country was left wondering about its own justice system.
All right, so let's dive right in. Think of this as our roadmap for navigating all the twists and turns of this case. We're going to break down not just what happened, but we're also going to try and figure out why. Why, after all this time, that one fundamental question, who did it, is still so profoundly, and I mean painfully, unanswered. Okay, so our story kicks off in May 2008. We're in Noida, a pretty typical middle-class suburb, inside the home of the Talwar family. Now, Rajesh and Nupur Talwar, they were both respected dentists. They had a booming practice right there in their community. And their 13-year-old daughter, Aarushi, well, by all accounts, she was bright, she was popular. On the surface, you're looking at a perfect picture of modern, successful urban life. And this is where the case takes its first completely impossible turn. On the morning of May 16th, Aarushi is found dead in her bed. Her throat had been slit. The family's live-in help, a man named Hemraj, is gone, so naturally the police immediately name him the prime suspect. A manhunt is launched. But then, just 24 hours later, the entire story just collapses. Hemraj's body is found on the locked terrace of that same apartment, and he'd been killed in the exact same way as Aarushi. Think about that. The prime suspect was actually the second victim. You'd think it couldn't get more confusing, but that was just the beginning. What followed was a series of just catastrophic mistakes. Everyone knows the first 48 hours of a murder investigation are absolutely critical. And the way this crime scene was handled, well, it would go on to damage, maybe even permanently destroy any chance of ever getting to the real truth. So the crime scene, to put it bluntly, it was a complete disaster. It was never properly secured. You had dozens of people. We're talking police, media, neighbors, just trampling through the apartment, contaminating absolutely everything. This flies in the face of something called Lecard's exchange principle. It's a basic forensic idea. Think of it like this. If you walk through a muddy field, you're going to leave footprints, right? And you're going to get mud on your shoes. A killer always leaves something behind and takes something with them. But because this scene was so hopelessly compromised, all that crucial evidence, fingerprints, handprints, you name it, it was just lost, gone forever. The investigation was basically crippled from day one, forced to rely on theories instead of actual proof. And when you don't have hard evidence, you get a vacuum. And that vacuum was immediately filled by this just bewildering series of totally contradictory official theories. As the case got passed from one investigative agency to the next, the official story of what happened that night just swung wildly from one extreme to the other. It was like watching a tennis match. Just look at this. This chart really lays out how jarring the shifts were. First up, you have the local police. They immediately point the finger at the parents, floating this idea of a so-called honor killing. And of course, the media just ran with it, painting the father as the killer. Then, India's top investigators, the CBI, take over. Their first team clears the parents completely and arrests 3 other domestic workers. But then a new CBI team comes in and the pendulum swings right back. They go back to accusing the parents. The investigation was literally arguing with itself in public. And just when you think it can't get any more bizarre, it does. The second CBI team, the one that suspected the parents, they actually admitted they didn't have enough proof to go to trial. So they filed a report to close the case. But then, in a move that just stunned legal experts, the judge rejected their report. And not only that, he ordered the parents to be tried for murder based on the exact same inconclusive evidence the CBI said wasn't enough. What happened next was this huge legal drama that completely split the country. In 2013, a lower court found Rajesh and Nupur Talwar guilty. They were sentenced to life in prison, based entirely on a chain of circumstantial evidence. But then, 4 years later, a higher court delivered this just blistering acquittal. The judges tore into the prosecution's case, saying the evidence was weak, and the logic was, and I quote, flawed. The parents walked free, but that didn't mean justice was served. The crime was just unsolved all over again, back to square one. So, with all the official stories leading to a dead end, it's really worth taking a look at a different theory, one that actually tries to make sense of the evidence that the other theories seem to just ignore. And this comes from Dr. T.D. Dogra, a really renowned forensic expert who dug deep into the case files. Dr. Dagra's whole hypothesis is built on a pretty simple but powerful idea. The killer wasn't in the family. It was an outsider. And here's the crucial part. It was someone familiar enough to be known by both people, by Aarushi, the 13-year-old girl, and by Hemraj, the family's domestic helper. Okay, so here's how he reconstructs the night. Step 1. An acquaintance of Hemraj shows up at the apartment, maybe to settle a score, maybe over money. To keep things quiet, they head up to the terrace to talk it out. That's when the argument just explodes into violence and Hemraj is killed. But then the killer has this horrifying realization. Aarushi saw him come in. She is the only eyewitness who can place him at the scene. So to silence that witness, he goes to her room and kills her. What's so compelling about this is that it provides a coherent motive for both murders, and it finally explains a key puzzle, why Hemraj was probably killed first. But you see, the Talwar's acquittal didn't bring any real closure. If anything, it just magnified these deep, unsettling questions that have been haunting this case from the very beginning. And these aren't just abstract questions. They're rooted in hard forensic clues that none of the official theories have ever been able to properly explain. Okay, first up, the internet router. It was sitting in Arushi's room, and the forensic logs show it was switched on and off throughout the night of the murders. So who was using it? Was it just Aarushi, up late like any teenager? Or was it the killer, checking the connection to see if anyone else in the house was awake and online? We just don't know. Then you have the bloody footprint. This was found on the terrace, right near Hemraj's body, and forensics confirmed it didn't belong to any of the known suspects. Not the parents, not the other servants they looked at. It's like a phantom clue. It's actual physical proof that some unknown person was right there at the crime scene, and yet it led absolutely nowhere. And finally, there's the missing murder weapon. The wounds on both Aarushi and Hemraj were made with what experts called clinical precision. This led the police to theorize that a surgical scalpel was used, a tool that dentists would be familiar with. But despite searching that apartment and the entire area from top to bottom, that weapon was never, ever found. In the end, the case of Aarushi Talwar and Hemraj Banjade, it's about so much more than just a tragic double murder. It's a story about how our institutions can fail us, about how media stories can completely poison the search for justice, and about how sometimes the simple, devastating truth can just stay forever out of reach. Who really killed them? That question is still hanging in the air. It remains India's most haunting, and maybe its most unsolvable mystery.